Hi everyone, today we're looking at part 2 of page 1 of the Stitch Library book, and we're going to be looking at, for those of you that aren't following the project, we're looking at blanket stitch, buttonhole stitch and back stitch, the 3 B's I suppose. Our layout for today can be found underneath. You can print it off and transfer it onto your fabric. If you're interested to find out about the fabrics and about how we're setting up the project, what we're doing, have a little look at the introduction that's listed on the YouTube channel. Okay, so we're basically using a linen that has some interface, woven interface in the back, ironed onto the back, and we're using today some 2-ply wool embroidery thread. This is 100% merino thread that has been hand dyed with indigo, dark, medium and light. And if you do want to use these threads, these are available on our Etsy shop. If you don't want to use these threads, however, you don't have to. I suggest you try something like a Pearl 5 DMC, something thick. Something where we can cover our lines and not having to worry about fussing around with invisible, inks that can be washed out or ironed out, anything later. Let's get started. This is the back stitch box. We're coming up and down just like we would for the running stitch. And then we come back up like we would for the running stitch. But this time, instead of going forward, we're going to go back. That's the name. And you go back into the hole that you made at the end of your last stitch. And now, instead of having a line of straight stitches, as we did with our running stitch, we now have a continuous line. With no space in between the stitches. Now again, you can do these stitches any size you want. You can be large or small depending on what thread you're using and what you're stitching, how long the line is. There's no right or wrong, it's really up to you what you feel comfortable with. Okay, so that's the back stitch. I'm going to finish these lines and I'll come back and move on to the blanket stitch. Okay, so next we're going to look at the blanket and buttonhole stitches. Now, they're very similar stitches. They're basically the same stitch, it's just a case of how far apart you actually do the stitch. Blanket stitch is called blanket stitch because you can find it on the end of quite a lot of blankets, around the outside of it. It's a nice way of trimming up edges, of appliquing. There's a lot of different ways you can use blanket stitch. So I'm going to start off on your line on this internal square that we found. Then you want to go down directly underneath, having a, basically as if you're doing a straight stitch, but don't pull all the way through. Leave a loop. You will now want to come up directly next to where you started. This is to start off. And before we pull this through, we're going to put our loop over. We want our loop to be on the right side of the needle. When you're sewing from left to right, you want to be on the right side of the needle. If you're going from right to left, you'd put your hoop on the other side of the needle. You basically just want to make sure that your stitch comes up inside the loop. So we're now going to pull it through. So we want our thread to be on the opposite side to the direction in which we're sewing, basically, is what we were trying to achieve by that. So now, to continue our stitching, we want to go down equal to the bottom of the previous stitch. Again, we don't want to pull that all the way through. We want to come up directly above it. Again, we're making sure that we're inside the loop, that the loop is to the right of our needle, and we pull up. And that will form a line at the top. So again, we're going to go down, we're going to go, now we're going to come up directly above. We've got our loop to the right, so we can pull through. And it's just a case of giving it a bit of a jiggle so that it all sits right. So again, we're coming up above where we've gone down. Our thread is to the right. Oops, it's also around the hoop. And we're pulling through. Okay, so we're now going to, I'll show you how to do a corner. Now, I haven't spaced this out very well, but our corner is going to be made of 3 stitches. So you basically want to start about equidistance away from both lines. So, as I said, I've not really left enough of a gap there. I haven't got my spacing very good there, but that's okay. So we're starting our corner the exact same way we've been doing our stitches. So down, up, thread to the right, and we're pulling. Now this time we're going to go back down through the same hole that our last stitch originated. We're going to come up in the corner, and again our thread is to the right, and we're just going to jiggle that. And then our third stitch is the same. We're going to go back down through the same hole, coming up, and again we're making sure that our needle comes up through the loop. Now the way I've pulled that has just skewed it up a bit, so we'll just loosen that a little bit and get it to sit straight. And there we have our corner. So we can just continue on. Again, making sure our loop is around. Oops, we seem to have okay. Oops, having a bit of trouble with my hoop. It's a bit hard sometimes to sew in a way that you can see. I'm sort of sitting a little bit away, a lot further away from the hoop than what I would normally be. Okay, so we just keep Now, with your buttonhole stitch, it really is up to you at how long you're going to actually do the stitch, this part of the stitch, or how far apart you're going to put the stitches. They're all really up to you. It'll vary depending on what sort of thread you're using, what sort of material you use sewing on, or how big the piece is that you're doing. But the other thing that you can do is change it up a little bit. I actually sometimes like doing a bit of a change up. So what I'll do is a shorter stitch, and then the next stitch I might do is a bit longer down. Again, doing a stitch exactly the same. And then I'm actually doing these quite a fair bit apart, so I'll do a short one. Again, come up where you are, put your loop around. Oops. And then I might do a long one. Just alternating them just might change it up a little, gives you a different variation and a different look. Okay, so I've tied off the blanket stitch. I've got myself a new thread. I'm doing this in the mid indigo thread. And we're going to do the buttonhole stitch. So there is really no difference between the blanket stitch and the buttonhole stitch, except for one thing, and that is the space in between. So this time round, what I want to do is have this line that is going on the outside. I now want to make that line go on the inside. So we come up, we go down, we start exactly the same way that we started for the blanket stitch. Come through. But our next stitch is going to be right next door. The one and only difference between the two stitches. So basically, all the stitches will be done together. Now the reason why it's called a buttonhole stitch is because if you needed a buttonhole and you didn't have a sewing machine, you could use this stitch, and as I will show you later, we can then cut out in between our straight lines. This straight line that is formed both with the blanket stitch and the buttonhole stitch is very secure, and it's why it's quite often used on the edging of a material, because it will help bind the material that's underneath it. So if you were joining two pieces of material together and you did that around the edge, it would bind those two very close together and keep it very secure and help with any fraying issues, anything like that. And that is how buttonholes used to be done. I mean, in this instance, we're going to be doing a fairly decent sized rectangle, but if you were to bring this line down here, do this stitch and then snip between, you would have a buttonhole. So, again, we're going in, we're going out, we're making sure this is on the right, and we're pulling through. So I will continue doing that all the way round. My corners will be done exactly the same. They're just facing a different, you know, this way instead of that way. But I'll use the 3 stitches to get round. In fact, actually with buttonhole stitch, you'll most probably might need a few more than 3 to bring it all the way around and to join it so that it's not got any spare material in between the stitches. Okay, so I realised that my last explanation of getting around a corner may not quite been understandable. So I just thought we'd have a little look at it a bit closer up in focus. So I hope this gives you a bit more of a better look at it. But basically what you're doing is you come around the corner is do 5 stitches. So normally when we were doing our buttonhole stitch, we did 3 as we went around the corner, and we used this end of our stitch to have as the bottom hole for all 3 stitches. Now we're doing the reverse, and we're doing 5 stitches so they're closer together. So we're spreading these out a little bit as they go round, and we're keeping these virtually, not quite in the exact same spot, but pretty close to it as you can as you come around the inside. And then that should effectively get you around the corner, and it's taking about 5 stitches to get around that corner. Okay, so we've done the buttonhole stitch all the way around our square. Again, not always the most even, but that's okay. So now what we can do with this is actually cut out this centre bit. So we can start off by just doing a little snip, and then we'll extend that out. To across. And what I might actually do is take it out of the hoop, because that makes it a lot easier. Alright, so we're out of the hoop, and now it's just a case of slowly cutting out. Not quite getting the interfacing that's underneath. You need to make sure you get through both layers. Now, if you don't feel too comfortable doing too much more at this point, just neaten it up. And leave it like that if you want, but the idea, and it can be a little scary, but remember, this is just for practice. Doesn't matter if it's not perfect. We just want to get closer and closer without snipping any of the thread. Now as we get closer, I like to sort of hold it up like that. Now again, always make sure when you're doing it that you can feel the stitch underneath and that you're not snipping any of the stitch. I mean, there is still actually quite a bit of fabric there. You can even pull it up So there's still quite a little bit of fabric there, but it's being hidden underneath the stitch, and it's all being held together. And it really is a case of a feeling, you sort of feeling what's underneath the scissors. And again, you can just sort of push it up a bit and then snip top. But if you really don't want to do this, if you're really nervous and shaky and now is not the right time, that's fine too. Just leave it with the material still inside. That's fine. You don't have to have a hole here. And it's not perfect, like there's still, if you look carefully, white threads of the fabric that you can see. But overall, it's not too bad. And when that gets sewn onto the felt, the dark blue felt, the indigo felt that I'm going to make this week, it'll come through the hole and just give it a little bit variation, something different. See, there you go. Again, give it a go. If you make a mistake, doesn't matter. Do another one. This isn't anything precious. It's about just having fun and experimenting. But if you really are that nervous that the thought of doing it is going to stop you from ever sewing again, then of course leave the fabric inside and don't worry about it. It'll look just as good and be still your personal learning experience. Okay, I think that's it for this week. We've got the back stitch, blanket stitch, and buttonhole stitch. Thank you.